Hello and welcome to today's episode of The Startup Show, brought to you by Inc. Authority. I'm your host, Trevor Rowley. Hey, people are starting new businesses every day, and they have a decision that has to be made right at the very beginning. How are they going to structure the business? Do they want to set up the new business as a sole proprietorship? There's certainly some pros and cons related to that. Do they want to set up the new business as a corporation? There are pros and cons to that as well. Or would they like to set up their business as an LLC, a limited liability company, with its pros and cons? Well, to help take us through that process of making that decision, we want to welcome a very special guest to the program, Paolo Perez, who is an executive startup specialist at Inc. Authority. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Hey, so if I came to you as an entrepreneur wanting to start up my new business for the first time, never having done it before, and if I came to you and said, hey, I'm considering setting up my business as a sole proprietorship, how might you respond to that?
Well, there's definitely pros and cons to that specific setup, right? The biggest pro would be the simplicity of it. Comes down to your personal identity, right? It's very simple to set up. You simply go down to you file for a DBA, you do an EIN to the IRS, and you're technically ready to roll, right?
Yeah.
But there's definitely some cons to that. The biggest being is the liability aspect of it. You're set up directly as yourself, not an official government entity, no business entity, so you have no legal protection.
Okay. So you're telling me that if I operate as a sole proprietor, there's not really a separate business per se. The business and me are one and the same thing. And so I would be taking on all of the exposure, all of the risk associated with the business.
Correct. Both financially and legally, right?
Okay.
So for example, a food truck, food poisoning, something happens, a lawsuit goes directly to your personal identity. So your personal assets are all up for grabs.
Got it. So while it might be simple and it might be inexpensive and it might be easy to start up and quick to start up, you sometimes get what you pay for, right?
Exactly.
And so you're not exactly getting any limited liability protection with that, although you might be able to start up your business. So you probably don't necessarily recommend that to people then, because one of the biggest parts of setting up a brand new business is you want to limit that liability and limit your exposure. You can't do it through a sole proprietor.
Exactly. Although it's convenient, it's not, like you said, legally best way to protect yourself.
Gotcha. So that's where corporations and LLCs come into play, if I understand it correctly, right? Corporations, LLCs have limited liability protection. So what about a corporation? Would I choose a corporation? What would be the pros and cons?
Definitely a great option for it, right? I see major companies do it, Coca-Cola, Nike, things like that, right? There's definitely a lot of pros. The biggest ones being, obviously the tax benefits for forming a corporation. You file quarterly taxes, but you have that legal protection, the corporate veil, right? Mm-hmm. The biggest con to that would be just the requirements based on state to state. Yeah. Some require 1 incorporator, some require 6 on the board, so it just comes down to your situation, but it's definitely a great way to go about it.
Yeah. Corporations have been around for a long time. People are familiar with them. They're very traditional, right? It's an instrument where somebody can start their business. It's a separate legal entity in the eyes of the law from them as an individual, so they're gaining some asset protection that way. But it does come with a lot of formalities, a lot of mandatory requirements, lots of meetings, lots of paperwork, all of those sorts of things, which if you love that sort of thing, not a problem, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of first-time business owners, the idea of a mountain of paperwork is a little bit scary, right? So, Paolo, where does an LLC start to come into play then? What are the advantages or disadvantages of that structure for businesses?
Absolutely. So the basic terms would be the simplicity of it. They only require 1 manager compared to corporations that require multiple directors if needed, depending on the state. Mm-hmm. But the biggest reason, too, is the simplicity of it. Compared to corporations, you only have to have 1 meeting a year for your minutes. Corporations need quarterly minutes, right? So especially for small business owners, is the easiest way to get the full financial and legal benefits of a corporation without having the complexity of making sure you're staying up to date.
And LLCs really are the instrument that probably 95+% of new business owners use today. And the reason they do it is because it does have some simple aspects, like you said, similar to sole proprietorships, similar to limited partnerships in some ways, but it has the asset protection components of corporations. So you get that same corporate veil protection that you mentioned by virtue of an LLC. And by that, you mean sort of a barrier that separates, the business's assets and liabilities from your personal assets and liabilities so that they don't mix, right? And you don't want somebody to go and attach your personal assets to something associated with the business and vice versa. So really important to have that. You get that through an LLC, but not as many mandatory requirements as you see with a corporation, which makes it really appealing to a brand new business owner.
Exactly. Yeah. So like you said, the main thing for there is the simplicity of it, right? And like you said, we're trying to keep it 2 separate buckets, the personal bucket, then the business bucket, right? And that's what that LLC does, especially for small time business owners, maybe mom and pop shops, right? Maybe just one guy starting out on his own.
Yeah.
That's the best way to make sure your personal assets and your legacy is protected.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people have these great ambitions and visions, right? Of maybe I'm going to start small, but what if I get big? Will an LLC still be a structure that I can utilize if I get a lot bigger? And the answer generally is
Yes.
yeah,
absolutely.
you can, right? I think the only exception to that is if you were wanting to go public at some point, you would probably need a corporation. But if you're going to go public at some point anyways, you're going to have a whole team of lawyers who's probably going to restructure anything anyways. So it really doesn't matter at this point. But an LLC for most business owners is a great structure that's going to carry them through from the beginning of the business till there's an exit from the business at some point. Now, what about taxes, for example? Are there flexibility of choices in how you deal with taxes with an LLC? Are there advantages there as well?
There are definitely. So what I've heard from what I've known, right, there's two main types, S Corps and C Corps. There's a common misconception out there that only corporations can file as certain S Corps and C Corps. That's not the case. Fortunately, LLCs are given that flexibility to file with each one, and then depending on what's best for your specific situation, right, you may go with an S Corp, and may go with a C Corp. It just depends on that situation.
Yeah, so you've touched on something that's really important. Is one of the main advantages of having an LLC is you have a multitude of choices that you might not have as a corporation. And one of those choices is in how you choose to be treated for federal tax purposes with the IRS.
Right.
And so if I'm a single member LLC, a member being the owner, the term that's used for an owner. So if I'm the only owner, a single member, I can choose to be what's called disregarded for tax purposes with the IRS, which simply means they'll treat me essentially as if I were a sole proprietor for tax purposes, but I still retain all of my limited liability protection. If I've got multiple owners, I can choose to be taxed partnership style, which means still maybe fewer deductions than if I were a corporation for tax purposes. But if I'm a smaller business, that may not be important to me. And then I get the additional choices that you just mentioned, that even though I'm an LLC, not a corporation, I can still choose to be taxed as if I were a corporation, as if I were an S corporation, or as if I were a C corporation. I can have all the advantages of limited liability, ease of use, flexibility, and choices of an LLC, but still be taxed as if I were a corporation. I can gain the tax deductions, et cetera. And in some cases, it's the best of both worlds, right? You get all of that asset protection, you get the simplicity, ease of use, and choice, and the tax benefits as well. One of the reasons why people are choosing LLCs all the time. In your experience, you talk to, thousands and thousands of business startups all the time. What are some of the reasons that they're leaning towards getting an LLC instead of a corporation or a sole proprietorship?
Yeah, so the biggest reason we've heard, right, is like my friend recommended it, but mainly what I've heard is just that's what legally protects them. They may not know exactly the technicalities of how they receive that protection, but they've heard it's the simplest way for one person, two people businesses to make sure they're fully set up, legally protected, and they still have all the benefits, like you said, of a corporation.
Yeah, that makes my heart happy to hear that, because too often I hear of business people who aren't thinking about that legal separation. They're just jumping into the pool of getting their business started, right? And before too long, maybe something unfortunately happens, whether it's an accident, a lawsuit, product liability, anything like that. There might be a lawsuit, and all of a sudden they realize that their own personal assets are on the line. They didn't think it was going to be that way. They felt like if I had a business, that business was the separation. But if you're a sole proprietorship, there really isn't a separation. It's you and the same. So to hear you say that people are coming to you and saying, hey, I need legal separation, I want to protect myself, shows that there's a lot of smart entrepreneurs out there.
Absolutely.
And now you just can help guide them to make that decision. Well, do you want to use a corporation for that limited liability, or do you want to use an LLC for that limited liability? And they're typically choosing simplicity, ease of use, and choice.
Absolutely. As would I if I was in that situation.
Yeah. So if I came to you and I was starting my business and we talked about it for a little bit and I made the determination that I wanted to follow the LLC path, what would that look like? How long does it take for me to actually get the business set up?
Yeah, so it's really simple, right? Obviously, most states have their different timelines. Generally, you're looking at about 3 to 4 weeks to get everything finalized and set up. Mm-hmm. And it's really simple. It's 3 main steps. Obviously, first one, state registration for the name, right? Want to secure the brand, make sure no one else in the state can use it.
Yeah.
Second step would be the important EIN number, which stands for Employer Identification Number. Think of it basically like a social for the company, right?
Yeah.
Use that for taxes and bank account purposes. But the third step and the limited liability aspect of it is the corporate required legal documentation. So you have your operating agreement, your minutes of resolutions, and the ownership certificates. Yeah. Those 3, when done correctly, creates called the corporate veil. Yeah. That's the legal and financial separation between you and the business. Creates those 2 buckets.
Yeah. Okay. So those are just a few easy steps then, right? That I guess if I was trying to do it on my own, it would probably be difficult because I might not know how to find those things or write those things.
Right.
But I suppose Inc. Authority makes it easy.
Absolutely. So we take care of the 3 main steps. So obviously step 1, register your name with the state, secure the brand. Step 2, we'll take care of the IRS headache for you, right? Deal with that EIN number, the employer identification number.
Yeah.
Third step, we're going to make sure you have all your corporate documents set up correctly, cross all the T's, dot all the I's, make sure you're fully protected, and we ship it right to your house in a beautiful leather bound binder that we have all your important documents right in one place.
That's fantastic. You know, one of the things that I really love about Inc. Authority is in addition to making sure that you have everything you need, as you just described, the support is there as well. And there's a lot of e-commerce, internet-based business formation companies out there that are happy to take people's money and maybe spit out a document or two, but there's not very many that have a full suite of services and live customer support with experienced business people who can walk them through the process, guide them, direct them. You know, questions are going to come up, particularly for the first-time business person. When they start getting correspondence from the IRS, they don't know what it is. They start to get all of these other things, requirements for business license, et cetera. They just want somebody that they can turn to and ask questions and talk to. And that's probably the biggest thing I think that Inc. Authority offers is that lifetime support to help that business owner through the lifetime of their business to help grow and scale a business.
Absolutely. We have fantastic support team that deals with every question from A to Z, from document walkthroughs, tax questions, retrieving EINs. So we definitely don't leave them out in the wind by themselves.
Yeah. Now, another thing that's great about the LLC package at Inc. Authority is it includes a business advisor, right? Now, it's not like there's going to be an individual that's going to show up at the person's door and say, I'm here, right? But they'll be able to contact them over the phone, by email, chat, etc. It's one of our experts that has run their own businesses that's going to spend time and give attention to a new business owner to help guide them through this path. And it's going to introduce them to websites and trademarks and business plans and business credit and all those things that a business owner is going to need at the right time to help them grow and build that business. So fantastic, again, thing that Inc. Authority does that nobody else does in this space, that shows how much they care about the customer and want that customer to succeed. Can you tell me a little bit more about the business advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great service that we provide. Like I said, a lot of our competitors don't, which I think is a really misstep on their part, because that's the biggest support for the clients, right? It's once the initial setup is done, what's next? That's exactly what that advisor is there for. Talk to you one-on-one. You get the same guy who'll know you one-on-one as like your best friend for your business. That way he can go through with you specifically what may interest you in business credit, business planning, maybe on trademark your brand, copyright it, design a logo for it, right? So obviously the advisor is there tailor-made to you for your situation. And that way, like I said to my clients, you can call them 6 times a day, 6 times a year.
Yeah.
They're there for you.
That's right. Fantastic value add at Inc. Authority. Well, what other advice would you give to a first-time entrepreneur?
Do your research. There's a lot of misinformation on the websites, a lot of information from our competitors, right? Do your due diligence. Give us a call. Even if you don't go through us, we'll be happy to give you the right information, right? We want to make sure you're done correctly because we don't want anybody to be left out in the wind for you. So do your due diligence, double check your sources, make sure you know exactly what the government's requiring from you, what your state needs from you. And like I said, whenever you're ready, give us a call. We'll be happy to help you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us today, Paolo. It's been a pleasure having you on the program. And thank you for joining us today on this episode of The Startup Show. As always, brought to you by Inc. Authority. Hey, now would be a good time to hit the like button. We hope you've enjoyed the content today. And make sure that the notification bell is turned on so that you don't miss any future content. We're going to bring you value each and every day. So this is Trevor Rowley, your host, signing off from this edition of The Startup Show and wishing you much success.